I loved history in school, but what I got taught didn't resonate with me. I got taught names of kings and queens, of princes and princesses, but nothing about anybody who looked like me. 1919 was a year of change, instability, and uncertainty. All over the UK, race riots broke out. 5 people got killed, dozens were injured, and we're still living with this legacy.
Did I learn about the 1919 race riots in school? No, I can't say I did.
It was more so about British white soldiers that we learned about.
I did not learn about the 1919 riots during my school period.
This is the story of a British lynching, the alt history you don't learn in school. A 100 years ago, Britain had won the war, but had been hit hard economically. When millions of soldiers, sailors and airmen returned from the front lines expecting a hero's welcome and to settle back into their old lives, they were met with job shortages and mass unemployment. Until the First World War, Britain's black population was minimal. It was around 10,000 people scattered around the country, but concentrated in the port towns like Liverpool and Cardiff. One paper said they live in distinct foreign colonies. Another called it the Negro Quarter and even Nigger Town. People began to look suspiciously at these newcomers. The black and Asian population became an easy target for the frustrations despite suffering from the many same economic hurdles. They were blamed for undercutting wages.
These soldiers would have been like working or lower class, like white men who've come back after years of strife and hardship in the struggle which they had, but then having their anger of now rather than, oh, it's not your government's problem, it's because these black guys are here.
White workers began to demand changes. In Liverpool, blacks were sacked because whites refused to work alongside them.
I think it's just fascinating how people's lives can literally be just like turned upside down just at the whim of other people's decisions, like beyond their control.
It's weird because it's still going on today in terms of immigration.
Just as tensions were rising about jobs, there was another problem. Some people didn't like the idea of racial mixing. In Cardiff, the press noted the sex problem, saying interracial relationships were repugnant and produces a state of violent resentment on the part of the relatives of the misguided girls and women.
So all of this started based on the fact that white women thought the black men were superior to white men.
They're ours, not yours. They're meant to be for us. You're not meant to have opinions in terms of the women. They're thinking you're meant to have opinions, not meant to have ideas. You're not meant to have eyes for anyone else but us.
On the 5th of June 1919, in a pub on George Street in Liverpool, a fight broke out between a group of Scandinavian and a group of black sailors. But when the police arrived, guess what? They only arrested the black sailors. Nearby, a mob begins to gather. Meanwhile, 24-year-old Charles Wootton, who was not part of the riot, suddenly became a target of the mob. Charles is hunted through the city by 2 policemen and the mob. He arrived at Queen's Dock and somehow he ended up in the water. A crowd of as many as 300 people began to throw rocks at him as he tried to swim away. Bystanders stood, watched and shouted, "Let him drown." Charles Wootton was murdered, a victim of the race riots of 1919. He was lynched.
Hearing the story of Charles made me feel angry and frustrated that this happened, but also disappointed in how it has been remembered.
It's just another one in the list of many names and many unnamed people that have been killed due to racism.
When I was a kid, my grandma said to me, if you're afraid of the monster under the bed, then call it out. And that became my way, to run towards things, to confront them. But what could Charles do? He had an angry mob of 300 people intent on killing him. He was murdered in plain sight. This was not a local phenomenon. Similar events took place all across the UK. Not only immigrants were targeted, but anyone who associated with them. In Cardiff, a mob stripped a white woman who was married to a black man and knocked out her front teeth with a baseball bat. When the chaos began to settle, the government's response was to fear a black backlash. They wanted to get rid of the black immigrants. They even paid for them to leave. Sadly, many of those who were repatriated, who fought for this country, would have felt a massive sense of injustice about being sent away from what they considered to be their motherland. Their sense of Britishness was not enough to convince the authorities or the general public that they had the right to stay here. What's worse, in many cases, they were blamed for the riots of 1919, despite having to defend themselves from white mobs. No one was convicted for the murder of Charles Wootton.